question you've got throughout the presentation, if you want to use the hands up facility available on Zoom, we'll be able to unmute to you and come to you at that point. But please just use the chat box for now. That would be fantastic. Fab. So Gitika and Gordon, is there anything else from you guys before we start?
I think that's us. That's us, yeah. Great. Thank you, Rach.
Fab. So I will hand over to you two.
Brill. Thanks, everyone. Lovely to see you all, or not see you as is the way, but it's great to have you here. And also, likewise, welcome to Gitika, who is actually a member of our board now. So we're really grateful to her for her support during what's been quite a challenging few months for many of us. Gitika's just going to give an overview of her career to date and some advice as well around her learning to date in her career. And then, as Rach mentioned, there's an opportunity to ask questions. So if you just pop them in the chat down below. I've already got a couple of questions that have been submitted before, just to get the ball rolling. But yeah, as questions arise whilst Gitika's talking and so on, just pop them in the chat, and then I'll make a note of them, and then we'll come back to them as we go along. With no further ado, over to you, Gitika.
Thanks, Gordon. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I hope everyone's well. Yeah, thank you very much for having me and for having me in this space. So yeah, I'm going to take a bit of time over the next sort of 20 minutes or so to just give you a bit of an intro to my career so far. And then I would really like to open it up quite quickly, if that's okay with Gordon and the team,
Sure.
To everybody else, because I think it's important to hear from you guys and to have a little discussion / question and answer of things that might be in your head that you want to kind of talk about. So yeah, we'll get on to that as well, and really like to hear from you. So I will kick off. I've got a little bit of a prezi just because I hate my face on screen mainly, and I'd like to put the focus somewhere else. And yeah, so I'm just going to share my screen and I'll talk along with it at the same time. So if anybody can't see, just let me or Rachel and the team know, and we'll do something about it. So I'm just going to kick off if there's no problems. Okay, great. So my journey actually started off really recently. I only graduated in 2016, so that's about 4 years ago. I studied drama and English at Liverpool John Moores University, and then had to leave Liverpool quite quickly after because, as a lot of people know, money's not very lucrative after uni, and as a student I was quite skint, so I had to move back home. I'm also just going to give you an FYI that I'm going to be really realistic here and not cut out any of the struggles or the hardships that happened on my way, because I think people forget to talk about that, and that's really important. So I graduated university in 2016, and then I went on to do my part-time job. So I was waitressing at TGI Fridays. Again, I think it's important to mention the non-theatre jobs because these fund us on our way. I was working as a waitress. I also did some part-time stuff here at Eureka, which is a children's museum, where I worked with children, and we basically just played and had fun in a museum together. And then there was a lot of pressure from mainly family, I would say, to then get a kind of a graduate role. I wasn't getting anywhere in theatre. I was applying to lots of schemes. I wasn't getting anywhere. And then I thought, I'm going to start applying for general graduate schemes. So that's when I applied to be a consultant for an IT group, which is super random, but I think it's important to mention because it's definitely helped me on my career journey so far. So as a consultant, I learned the art of business. I was there for 1 year. As part of that role, I was kind of trying to win new business and win new clients. And after a year was up, I was super duper miserable and just thought, I'm going to have to go and follow my dreams again and give this theatre thing another go. So as I was there, I was constantly applying for schemes, and off the back of one of the things I applied for, one of the schemes came through. which was a bursary from the JMK Trust. I think this is a really good one to note down if you're interested in getting some money through from and getting experience of working in a building. It funded me to be a resident at Leeds Playhouse for 3 months, and I was a trainee assistant director there, so I worked on quite a few things. Whilst I was there, I also was really interested in all of the other departments. So I made sure that I looked at youth theatre when I was there. I was helping out with youth theatre after hours, other productions. I would pop my head around to other directors and to other creatives and see what they were making in the building. Also getting involved with local artists by going to scratch nights, by meeting local artists, speaking to the producers there as well, and getting to know what kind of artists do I need to be knowing about in Leeds, because at that point I had no idea. I'd moved from Liverpool, so my knowledge wasn't very big. I also got involved with other things in the building like R&Ds, which is just a fancy acronym for research and development. And I also met a really awesome theatre company called Lung Theatre, which I'll explain later. I ended up doing some work with them later on in my career. So I think just to mention here, it's really important that if you get the opportunity to be inside the building, really utilise your time in that building, because there's so many other things that you can be doing. You can get your face seen by a lot of people and your voice heard. So I would just say that, yeah, if you get the opportunity to do that, please do utilise it. So off the back of that, I was then offered a role as assistant producer at Leeds Playhouse for a month or so. I think it was 2 months in the end. And I was producing the Furnace Festival there, which is for emerging artists and companies. And I learned lots about producing. I learned lots about all of the emerging artists that were coming out of the Leeds scene. And it was a fantastic thing to work on. So after that job finished, I was really worried. I was stuck between a rock and a hard place, because I had this awesome kind of experience at Leeds Playhouse, but it was contracted and I knew there was an end time to it. So when that piece of work came to an end, I was very close to picking up the phone to my old consultant job, and I was also very close to going back to TGI Fridays as a waitress, because for quite a few months I wasn't in any work. And I was living off my savings. I used my last 100 quid to basically go on loads of meetings and train fairs to and from Manchester. I was going to Hull, quite a few around Yorkshire, and also just trying to meet people virtually as well, which was cheaper for me. And luckily, off the back of some of those meetings, I then landed one of my first full-time roles in theatre, which was at the Octagon in Bolton. It wasn't a direct job that was handed to me on a plate after a meeting, but I met the artistic director and she then knew who I was and she asked me to apply. So there was hundreds of people that applied for this role, and luckily I got it, but I think it also definitely helped that I'd met the artistic director a few weeks before. So in this role, I was a participations director, so I was doing all of the participatory work in the building. The youngest person I was working with was about 4 years old. I think the oldest one was about 94, 95. So I worked with a real span of ages and abilities there as well. And whilst I was there, I got to assistant direct on quite a few productions, and I also got to direct all of the participatory work. So it was a really good bit of experience for me. As I was doing that, I was dipping my hands in at other things. I think it's really important to mention that if you've got a goal, if you've got a dream, to keep finding opportunities, even when you're in work, because when you're in a full-time role like the one I was in before, it's very easy to get consumed with that. I think it's important then to keep applying for other roles and other opportunities that interest you. And I was really interested in a piece that Derby Theatre was making about forced marriage, specifically within South Asian families. I worked on the R&D there, and then the commission came into fruition and they were going to commission this piece of work that the artistic director was going to direct. But unfortunately, she got really ill a couple of months before we were going to go into rehearsal, and she asked me if I would step up into this role as director with her mentoring me. So it was a real kind of reach, but I was really scared, but I absolutely went for it. And with the help of Sarah, who was artistic director there, I had a really brilliant experience of directing that piece. So I was spending a lot of time in the Midlands, and I also heard about this company called Birmingham Opera Company. I knew they were putting out a job role. I'd heard about it. Other people had told me about it. But to be really honest with you, opera is something that has never interested me. It's something that I had never experienced before this role. In fact, I saw my first opera on the second week of the job. The reason I went for this role is because if you Google the company and do a little bit of research on the company, they have astounding figures. 80% of their audiences are new every time they do a new piece, and of that at least 40 or 45% are BAME, which these are figures that would amaze me in theatre, let alone for opera. So I was just absolutely astounded as to how they were doing that, and I was really honest in the interview and said that's the reason that I'm going for the role. And they weren't scared about the fact that I had never seen an opera. In fact, they were really interested in that because I was asking questions that I needed in order to make something like opera accessible. So I did that role for a year. And as part of that, I did quite a lot of work for Opera North, the Royal Opera House in London. And I also did some work for the European Opera Conference, which takes place in different places in Europe. And I was a keynote speaker as well in Paris at the opera conference there, talking about how to make opera as accessible as possible. I can chat a little bit more about that role if you are interested, because it is a really kind of radical, revolutionary company. So if you're interested in knowing a bit more about that, let's delve into it later. So after that, I then decided to go freelance. And this was the role that really kind of gave me the confidence to go freelance. This was the company that I was talking about earlier, Lung Theatre, who I met at Leeds Playhouse, and they offered me a role there to work on Trojan Horse. And after that piece, I realised that, this is exactly what I want to be doing. And again, not forgetting about your goals. What is your end goal? And for me, the opera job was vital in learning about a company and how to run a company on a senior level. But my goal was always to be doing that in theatre and not in opera. So I took the plunge to go completely freelance. And after loads of meetings, interviews and more meetings, all of my freelance work began. So I started to work with the National Theatre and the Cast Theatre in Doncaster, working on a project called Public Acts. I'm also working on a piece for Stick Festival called Four Dolies and a Divorce. And I'm also currently working on 5 plays at the Young Vic as well, which hopefully after this pandemic will still happen. So that is a real quick whistle-stop tour of my career today, and I just wanted to leave you with these little pieces of, not advice, but I think just nuggets of info, that these are some of the things that have really kept me going throughout my career. And one of the main things is affirmations, and this is one that you always have to remember, that you are an artist, that you are valid and you are needed. And if you can say that last sentence there, I am an artist, I am valid, I am needed, every day to yourself when you wake up, some people might think it sounds really silly, but it's really helped me on my journey, because even those days when I was waiting tables at TGI Fridays and wasn't finishing till 1-2 o'clock in the morning, I still had to wake up with the mentality that I might be waiting tables today, but I am also an artist, I'm also valid, and I am needed. And that really sort of has kept me going, and I still do that. These are some useful links. I'm happy to share those with Rachel or Gordon if you want to send them out. But these are, some useful links to kind of get you going there if you're wanting things to apply to and different schemes to have a look at. Gordon, I think that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing the career stuff. That was really weird. It felt like I was talking to myself. I hope everyone's following. And I wasn't.
You weren't at all. We were all listening intently.
Okay, that's great. So that's my career to date. Is that enough?
That's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. So, folks, if you want to start populating the chat with some questions, I'll then start putting those together. But Gitika, what came across there actually for me is that although we call this no one way, there are some parallels from various approaches that people have had in their careers over the years. And one of them that I find is authenticity, that when we're authentic, that's when the opportunities arise because they align with what we truly are. And so it sounded as if when you worked with Birmingham Opera Company,
yeah,
you were authentic with them. You weren't frightened to say, oh, I don't know, I haven't seen an opera.
yeah.
And actually that was the thing that they valued, part of the thing that they valued. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about times when you've been authentic, or maybe times when you felt that you haven't been quite such your authentic self, and the difference that's made.
Yeah, definitely. I think I have been, just because I've been managed by people who have made me feel confident to be authentic. I mean, the first job that I got, that scheme, the JMK bursary, being really honest and upfront and saying I haven't had any theatre work and I've come from IT, kind of, I think it was really important in me getting that role because I realised that afterwards they wanted someone who hadn't had any experience whatsoever in the industry and to give them an opportunity. So if I hadn't been honest about that, I don't think I would have got the next thing. And then also, theatre needs all kinds of voices, whether that is from an IT role, whether that is from someone who doesn't particularly enjoy opera but wants to work in a senior role in opera. I think all voices are important. And if you are your authentic self, you'll end up getting true happiness from a role because you'll never have to pretend to be something that you're not. Because if you sell yourself as something in an interview and you then don't end up being that person a year later, then everyone's not going to be happy, including you. So I think it's really important to be your authentic self.
Couldn't agree more. So we've got some questions coming in, but before they do, I just wanted to make a comment on that because it really struck with me as well. That essence of the linear path, that we feel that sometimes there's a sense of you go from one job, you progress to the other, and you sort of going up and up a ladder. Whereas actually, it's very rare that that's the case for many people, that there is a moment that you're doing one job but then you're having to do another, and that might not be what you want to do. But it's really important in order to survive and to live. And I think that, again, that really struck home for me as well, that it can be quite competitive about who's in what position, who's got what job, whereas the reality is, and you came around to this at the end of the speech as well, when you were talking about the affirmation, that actually, regardless of what we're doing, we remain an artist, or we remain a creative, or we remain whatever our chosen path is. And so we've got some questions coming in. Before we go to them, though, I'm just going to go to one that was posted before, and it was, what's the most difficult thing you've come across in your career, excluding this current pandemic?
Well, I'll be really honest, because it's a safe space, isn't it? I think for me, it's probably been I think working in opera was a real shock for me. Not necessarily that company, but the industry as a whole. I experienced a lot of racism. I experienced a lot of prejudice, especially for being a woman and for being quite young. And also for being in such a senior role. Often when I would go to conferences, in fact, I had a really awful experience in Paris where someone gave me their empty wine glass and was like, you should fill that up. And I was absolutely shook, because I was like, oh, and again, because I was quite young and naive, I didn't really know. I just thought maybe he mistook me for one of the waitresses there. And I kind of just said to him, oh, I'm on the conference, I've got a badge like you have, and, I'm part of a company here. And his first response was, whose assistant are you then? And I think that kind of attitude is something that I faced a lot in opera. And I constantly felt like every time I entered a room, I had to do a lot of work to kind of be deserving of a space, when a lot of other people didn't have to, and that was really exhausting. And then towards the end of my career there in opera, I just realised that actually I don't owe anyone anything to be able to, have my voice heard or to feel as equal as everyone else around the table. So again, that affirmation of trusting in yourself, that you are valid, you're important. is something that I did to come around that and to combat that. But I think that's been the most challenging experience. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely happened in theatre, but I think in opera, they're like decades behind theatre still, so they will openly be quite racist and use derogatory language. And it's about making sure and standing up for yourself and making sure that you tell people that you're uncomfortable with that, and then actually that's not appropriate, and reporting people when necessary, because they're publicly funded just as much as theatres are. So I think that's probably been my biggest one.
God, I'm sorry to hear that. That's rather unpleasant, isn't it? And
yeah, it's not the best.
And you mentioned then that opera, your experience of the opera world felt a bit different to maybe the theatre, but I should imagine that it can still feel a little bit like you're up against a systemic brick wall.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've not got the best things on my side. The fact that I'm a woman, that I'm coloured, and I'm also quite young. I've got all of the things that people wouldn't want. And I think, yeah, in theatre, I think even speaking specifically about directing, as a young director, it's quite intimidating going into a room full of actors who have got X, Y, and Z training from prestigious, schools, and who are twice your age, and you're coming in there as sort of authoritative leader type role. And that in itself has been a challenge, and I'm sure many of you have experienced that when you work collaboratively. But again, I think it's about going in with the right attitude and reminding yourself, why am I there? Am I there to make people feel like I'm in control? Definitely not. What are we here for? We're here to tell a story, and that's the joint purpose of why we're in the room. And I think if you're quite honest with people from the offset, you tend to have a better experience, because I know a lot of young directors who not lie, but they kind of twist the truth a bit and say, oh, I've done X, Y, and Z production to make people feel like they're in good hands because they're experienced. But actually, I think my strength is that I haven't got that much experience compared to other directors, so let's work it out together and I can learn from you. And if you're quite honest in the start, I think it really gets you quite far.
Couldn't agree more with that. You can tell when people aren't being truthful sometimes, and it comes across, and then you question whether you want to work with those people. So we'll go to questions, because there was a follow-up question to that, but unsurprisingly that pops up in the question. So the first one then we've got is from John McGuire. Hi John. I'll ask folks if they want to follow up as well once we've finished this. So Rachel Palmer, if you wouldn't mind unmuting John McGuire towards the end of this as well. But the first one is, who are the creatives, directors that you admire at the moment?
I was one that pops into my head straight away is probably a director called Sally Cookson. Just in the way that she works and her approach, she's about story, but she's about creating world first. And I think that's where my practice is going. Obviously I'm interested in text and exploring text, but in the last few productions that I've done, I've always focused on worlds and just taken a bit from what Sally Cookson does in her rehearsal room. That's director specific. Creatives wise, I'm an aspiring leader. I've always wanted to lead an organisation. I've always wanted to make change and become an artistic director of either a building or a company. And for me, I always look to people in those positions to kind of spur me on, to also have as a mentor on my journey. And there's a lady called Amy Leach at Leeds Playhouse at my home theatre in Leeds. She's been an absolute godsend, because every step of the way I always give her a call, and she can kind of help my spirits up and my confidence up in applying for roles. But also she's there just as a creative support for me to vibe ideas off. And I think that's really important to have at your home theatre, to have somebody there that you can always call up and speak to. And also other really influential artistic directors, many of whom are in London. Indu Rabusengam is one of them. She's another South Asian female who's artistic director at Kiln, and quite a few others. But it's a shame for me that a lot of the people that I aspire to be like, or the people that I look up to in the industry, are all down south. And I'm looking to really bring a bit more of that knowledge and a bit more of that kind of inspiration up north, because I think we can be doing and making exceptional work up here and have creatives that we can aspire to be up here rather than just down in London. I think I've gone off on a tangent, but yeah, that's a few.
Brilliant, thank you. Good to go. John, did you want to follow up on that at all?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Okay, then one from Grace. She's written, well, look, there's lots of exclamation marks here. Amazing, amazing, amazing stuff. So what do you think is needed from artists right now in this crisis with theatres closed, what we can do? And there's a similar one from Paolo here as well, around what advice would you give to aspiring directors and artists during this difficult time, and how can we make sure we're doing enough in this period?
Yeah, I think that's really important. Something, I'll be really honest with you, I'm figuring out myself. I think the first thing is don't put too much pressure on yourself. If you're in a position where you're financially okay and you're sustained, but you're looking to make work, I think don't put too much pressure on yourself, because right now I think is also a space to breathe and to think about what people need. We might not necessarily need to make anything. We might not have to do anything. I think that, yeah, I don't know if I've articulated that well enough, but I think it's important to stop and think in this time, instead of just thinking about churning out lots of what can we do, what can we do, what can we do. I think we can do a lot, but the first thing would be to have conversations with people. And by people, I mean, if you're wanting to create a piece, why are you wanting to create it, and who are you wanting to create it for? If it's for communities, then you need to be having conversations with those communities, because do they want a piece that is online that's an hour long to watch? Do they want a quiz? Do they want a sense of community through, I don't know, sending jigsaws to each other in the post? Because again, in my opinion, that is also a form of theatre. It's also a form of being creative. I think for me, it's always about asking the people that you're creating the work for, what do they want and in what form? And then that's a great place to start. Let me just see if I can address this. What do you think it needs from artists right now? What, with theatres closed, what can we do? Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it, Gordon, with theatres being closed?
Yeah.
I think
my take on it is it's interesting, because the theatres often say, this is what we want. This is the type of program that we're after, or this is our criteria. This is our governing vision, and artists respond in some respects to the vision, although occasionally, we also go out and look for work that responds to the vision. But there's a sense of going back to the authenticity and saying, well, actually, this is an opportunity for me to say, what do I want to do, without the restraints of a building stipulating what it is that they need to see. And you can then choose your environment to do that. So I've noticed quite a few artists are beginning to present work outside or in just found spaces. Yeah. It's not work that is paid admittance as such, but it still keeps the artistic and creative juices flowing, and also can raise profile still. So I still think there are other ways to go about it.
Yeah.
But I think it boils back to what you were saying about not giving yourself too much of a hard time. Give yourself space to breathe. It is a crisis across society. People are learning how to live in this moment, and as it ever evolves, what that then means in the future.
Definitely, and sorry, I've just broken you off.
No, I was just going to say, last month is different to this month, the next month will be different to this month. So it's sort of responding to the now, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And like you said, I think it's a really important point. Buildings aren't the be all and end all. And absolutely, you can go and take work and create them in spaces, and also theatres will be interested in that. So for example, I've just had one idea as we've been chatting then. Maybe one of the pieces could be that if there's a specific community that are suffering from loneliness, and we're all enjoying having our friends in our gardens or on our porches, maybe people won't have that, and one piece might be a couple of artists nipping around to people's gardens and 2 meters apart, giving them, I don't know, a kind of cider and chatting for an hour. And that in itself is a piece of theatre. And you could almost pitch that to your local buildings, who right now are thinking about lots of other things apart from artistic stuff, because they've got lecky to pay for, they've got water bills to pay for, and right now their head might not be in a creative space. So if you as a bunch of artists have this idea, go and speak to somebody in those buildings and say, hey, I've got an idea, do you fancy sticking in 100 quid, 200 quid, however much it's going to cost, and getting a few other theatres involved. I think the point is to always start with the idea and then go after money, then go after people's interest in that if you've got a really solid idea. Yeah, I think, but never ever do anything for free. I'm not condoning doing that. I'm saying pay yourself or get paid. But yeah, I think the best place to start is with a really strong, solid idea.
Brilliant, thank you. Question then from Rachel, who works at Unity. What do you think it means to create diverse work, and how does this translate to audiences? Sorry not to go back to Grace and Pal on that one, but I'm conscious of time now, so I think we'll just plow on the question. So what do you think it means to create diverse work, and how does this translate to audiences?
Diverse work in itself is such a packed and loaded couple of words. I think it means different things depending on different situations and circumstances. I mean, diverse work, diverse, I mean, let's just take the word diverse. What does that mean to you? Is that class? Is that race? Is that being a woman, being a man, being non-binary? What is that? Are we looking at gender, sexuality? I think it's really important to break that word down. So to me, in this context, what does it mean to create diverse work? It means that I'm actively making sure that as many voices as possible are being represented through the stories that I tell. And I think that comes hand in hand with part of my practice, which is anytime I create a piece of work or anytime I pick up a play text and decide to direct it, I always might ask myself the question, why now? And why this place? So if I was creating for the Unity, why does the Unity in Liverpool need this piece right now on the 1st of June in 2020? And if you can't answer that question, it's probably not relevant. I think it falls hand in hand with that idea of diverse work, that actually there are certain voices that need to be represented, and if we can't answer that question, we're probably not representing some of those voices. Again, I don't think I've articulated myself that well, but maybe I can a bit further on. But the second part of that question was, how does this translate to audiences? It's quite an open question there, Rachel. Do you mind just like giving me a bit more of a, I don't know, is there something else to add to that?
Yeah, I think the reason I asked it is because in my position, we find ourselves using terminology like diverse quite a lot, because there's quite a lot of, naturally there's a lot of reporting to do, applications to fill out. And I'm always quite conscious that words like diverse end up becoming buzzwords in applications, and we don't often get the word count truthfully to unpick what that means. And I was just really interested in, from an artist perspective, what that word means when you're actually thinking of creating a piece of work. And, you know, when you pick up the play text, like you said, is that the first moment you can consider when you say why now, why the place, what audiences it is you're going to be creating that work for? Is that like the kind of thought process that goes alongside that word diverse? Because it's like you say, it is really important to unpick it.
Yeah, I think it's super important. And actually, I was very much in the same boat when I was in my senior role in Birmingham, because I had to do a lot of reporting that was similar, and these words used to irritate the hell out of me, and something that we used to talk a lot about in the office. And actually, my boss used to say to me, well, what do you mean by diverse in this context of this project? And I would say, well, I mean Black and Asian people. Yeah. And he would say, well, just write that then. And I would be like, oh yeah, of course, I will just. And I think it's about not being scared that this particular piece is for Black and Asian people. It should be made with Black and Asian people, and the story should be about Black and Asian people, and use those words. Or if it's about gender and sexuality, then we need to say that, because like you said, Rachel, I don't think diverse is, I don't think it's a useful word. In Arts Council context, it totally is, because it ticks boxes. But I think as artists, we really need to challenge ourselves and break down that word diverse and ask ourselves, what do we mean by that when we're creating a specific piece of work?
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
So I'd really echo that, and the point that you made there, Gitika, about why now.
Yeah.
is really, really key. And I think artists truly questioning and really questioning why they want to do something is key, because so often that's a question that I might ask of people that approach us to present their piece. Why now? And it doesn't seem like it's really been considered. It's as if, well, it's something that I've always wanted to do, or and then people flounder a little bit. So I think a bit of background as to why, but also the specificity that you gave then around which audiences you feel this is for, or what it's about as well, and really breaking that down and not being afraid to say clearly, this is for, this is about, this is why, this is giving voice to. So that's absolutely brilliant. Excellent advice.
And just one little thing to really quickly add on to that is that if you are finding yourself, I think it's also important to know when to take up space and also when to leave the space and let other people take that opportunity. And if you are finding yourself doing something, for example, about, I don't know, if I was doing a story that was very specific for, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something I'm not an expert in. I don't know, a white man's problem, right? It's probably not my best place to be directing that piece of work, because probably a white man would probably be better to do that, if you see what I mean. And I'm not saying that you can't direct pieces if it's not of your direct experience, but I think it helps. And I think if you are the sole one who's going to go and take that job on, you should make sure that if you're not stepping back, at least invite people into the space who can inform you of those experiences and that you're doing your research. I just think that's really important to mention when we're talking about diverse work.
Absolutely. So going on to a different stream here now, we've got, what's your networking approach? And so this is from Grace, and she's saying she's terrible in a room of people. Okay, I find that hard to believe, but I'm sure. And then how do you get over the awkwardness pressure? Okay, so that's something that we can all feel. You mentioned difficulty or awkwardness that you encountered during sort of the time at Birmingham.
Yeah.
Any approaches, any particular takes on it?
Oh, I don't know, Grace. I think it depends on the circumstance. I don't know. I think just being confident in why you are there is one to think about, because if you've got a certain project to talk about, or a certain piece to talk about, or just something you want to get off your chest, it might be the pandemic, or any of these questions, you always have something to go to, if that makes sense. If you get awkward in a conversation, you feel like you're stuck, always have something in the back of your head that you can talk about and bring up conversation about. So I think the pandemic one for years to come will be a good one to have in your back pocket and when you're talking to people. But did you mean specifically, Grace, in a specific situation, like being in a room full of funders or being in a room full of, I don't know, audiences? Is there anything specific?
I feel like in a room of people, I get quite anxious that I'm nagging or that I'm prodding, or that I feel like I don't feel quite annoying.
I think it's a thing of like when we've been in like networking sort of like a bit like funding, so like programmers, those kind of things, feels a bit awkward because everybody kind of knows why you're there, but you're not going to go, will you put our show on in your theatre? That's never, you kind of have to like always talk around things.
And also I've always felt in lots of networking events we've been in, I think we've been quite intimidated by it feeling a bit kissy.
Yeah.
And it's how do you avoid that feeling that you'd feel like you want to come and have a conversation with someone without feeling like you're sucking up, or I don't know.
Because I don't think we're very good at that.
Yeah, I hear you girls, because it's a really fine line, isn't it, Gordon, between being kissy and being respectful. And I think for me, when people approached me in my last couple of senior roles for ideas, just being on the other side of it, so not from an artist perspective, but from someone who's been in those rooms and having been asked, please can you put my work on, or please can you commission it? Kissy is nice, but I actually respect those people who stand their own but have also done their research, if you see what I mean. So they've done their research on Birmingham Opera Company, they've done their research on my role there and what I'm in charge of, hence why they know I'm the person to speak to. And then that's enough kissy kissy for me. And then when we get down to what your piece is about, etc., that I'm going to be engaged. But that's me as one person. I think funders, Gordon, you've probably got a bit more experience than me on. But I guess the reason why funders are there in a room is because they're there to fund things, right? So they need a menu of things to fund. So offer them the menu. And this is a bit that I've learned from my sales stuff as a consultant when I worked for the IT place. You always have to sell to a need. So really, it's a bit manipulative, not manipulative, that's the wrong word, but it's a bit crafty, because essentially what you need to do is find out why people are there. Are people there because they're just interested in the event? Then they're probably not the person you need to speak to. Are people there because they've got money in their pocket? Well, then you need to speak to them. And when you are speaking to them, you know, find out what their interests are. Are they interested in young people specifically? Are they interested in Black and Asian work? What type of work is it? And if you've got something to sell to that need, then sell away, and I think don't feel guilty about it. But the two things are to do your research and to feel confident in that, and to also sell to a need if there is one. Does that help?
So useful. Yeah, so useful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I'd just add to that as well. There's an essence of acknowledging that you feel awkward, or that you feel pressure, because we all do. We all have these voices. Well, no, I wouldn't say we all do. I'm sure there are some people who are overconfident, etc., who just breeze through these without having to go and hide in the toilets, like I've done on a few occasions. I remember once at the Olivia Awards, it's supposed to be this great moment, and then there I was hiding in the toilets when I should have been networking. But I think it is about one thing that I learned pretty early on was to Google people beforehand, find out a little bit about them, and if there's a delegate list beforehand as well, maybe drop them an email if their email's been published on the delegate list, just to say, oh, we couldn't grab 5 minutes, could we? I've got something I'd love to talk to you about. But just be aware that the awkwardness that you're feeling, and you're thinking, I'd probably much rather be in a different environment, that's probably how most people are feeling. So keep it light, keep it breezy, and maybe you set yourselves a couple of objectives for what you want to say and what you want to get out, but you know, take the pressure off of yourself, really. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. What advice would you give to aspiring directors and artists? We've sort of covered that one. We're talking about these difficult times. With resources available to you during this lockdown phase, how can you maintain motivation through work and help find other interesting opportunities? We've sort of touched on that already in a way. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Gitika?
Maintaining motivation, I think, is a really interesting one to just chat about quickly, because again, it's that thing of taking the pressure off yourself, especially if you're in a situation where you're comfortable to, what I'm saying is some people have to work in terms of making sure that their theatre is going to fund their bills right now. Luckily, I've managed to do a tiny bit of savings on good for maybe this month and next month, and then I'm probably going to be at Tezzy's. But I think if you've got the privilege and the opportunity to take your day and do what you want with it, finding motivation in it, you might just need some headspace and some wellness time, or you might need to skill yourself up because your shifts at Tesco or your shifts at TGI Fridays might clash with a development opportunity that the Unity might be offering. Like right now, a 11:30 slot, you even coming in onto this call, I think is testament to your motivation, because you've got yourself up and you're on a call and counting those mini wins and finding other places that are doing the same. Like the Young Vic in London are offering quite a few development opportunities for directors. RTYDS are offering quite a few. So I'm happy to put all of these together, but finding ways to develop yourself in this time is a great thing, and it keeps yourself motivated and interested, I think. But again, don't be too hard on yourself, because if you have to go out and work, if you have to go and be a key worker and you're not being creative right now, please don't be hard on yourself about it, because essentially we have to live, don't we? And we have to pay the bills. So never ever beat yourself up about that. I think the other part of that question, through help finding other interesting opportunities, I'll give a list to Gordon and to the team so we can share out some interesting responsibilities. I hope that made sense.
Thank you. Yeah, and we've also got a list already of resources that folks can draw upon. So we'll add those details to that. There was before we, we'll go on to this question now. What advice would you give to artists who have to move from home after graduating? This is from Claire. And how do you stay motivated in non-theatre jobs? I think this is something we've all got experience of. You speak to that at all?
Yeah. So the first part, what advice would you give to artists who are moving home after graduation? I think give yourself the summer to do what you want with it, first of all, because you've just completed a massive step in your educational journey, and I think it's important to take a breather. I think then it's important to list your goals out. So for me, when I moved home from university, I was in this place of, it was quite confusing. I was very worried all the time because I didn't know what direction my life was going to be in. And it was about me just writing 5 things that I wanted, where I wanted to be in a year's time, or where I wanted to be in 5 years' time, and then work backwards from that almost. So it's like a to-do list, but working back. So if, like, my goals now have changed, when I started out, my goal was just to get a job in theatre, was to get a paid job in theatre where I wasn't working for free. And then kind of setting myself lists on how to do that and people that I needed to speak to make sure that happened. That's something I would advise when moving back home, to just realign yourself, and also to realign yourself to the city that you're in, because your home city or hometown compared to Liverpool might be completely different, and your local theatre, you might not have one. And if theatre is where you need to be, then actually moving and focusing your energy on moving to somewhere might be the first thing that you need to consider. In terms of staying motivated in non-theatre jobs, not going to lie, it's tough, innit, Gordon? It's not the easiest. But essentially, I think it's just affirming to yourself every day that reminder that, you know, why do you want to work in a specific role? Why do you want to be a designer? Why do you want to be a sound engineer? Why do you want to be a director, writer, whatever it is? And making sure that you're feeding that creative mouth quite a lot, if and where you can. So between shifts, if I could log into stuff like this, I would. If I could even just get 20 minutes on the phone with some of my mates from uni and talk about ideas, and ask the question, which we do sometimes now, if I had 100 grand to give you right now, what would you do with it creatively? Asking yourself questions like that, which they might seem silly, but it definitely keeps your head in the game. It keeps you thinking creatively. And then when you sign into your shift, you feel almost a little bit more motivated to get going. So yeah, this is really cheesy stuff, but this is stuff that really helped me through my non-theatre work.
That's fantastic. I wonder as well, when we graduated from the same university, didn't we? So John Moores, and I wonder, when you left, how different is the sort of industry landscape that you've discovered to what you thought it was when you came out of university, and what has helped your learning of what the industry landscape is?
I mean, it's very different, isn't it? Because you're in a vacuum almost at university, with the same people, with lecturers who are up for helping you. You've actually got space to work in when you want to, which is a huge thing. And you don't have to worry about money when renting out spaces, because they're free to you as part of the campus. Mm-hmm. I think then when you step into the real world, all of those things kick in. It costs money. It costs money to rehearse. It costs money to pay artists. It costs money to pay yourself to make sure that you can live. And that was I think that's the major change over from university to kind of the industry as it is. And then also, I would say at university, it's a bit cliquey, isn't it, at university? It might be different depending on your experience, but it is quite cliquey in that, you know, if you needed to get something done, you could pick the phone up to someone of your mates who you know is a guitarist, and they could do the track for you, whatever, and it's done. Whereas in this industry, again, it's that thing of people need to get paid. People might not be interested in working on your piece because they're not your friend, and they might not be interested in the story, that involves such and such a narrative. And it's about knowing that you have to almost create that click, but on a much wider scale, and go and treat it like, you have to almost like treat it like a university year group, but the whole industry, and do your best to get to know everybody and what their interests are, so that when a project comes up, you know exactly who to call and who might be interested. Because also I've had it where I've gone up to people and asked them to do things, or asked if they would be available to work on a project, and they've been offended because I haven't done enough research into their history and gone, you know, they've said, have you not looked at my past credits? I've not done anything like this, and I wouldn't be interested in it. And that's my fault because I haven't done my research. Again, I've gone off on a tangent, really sorry. But yeah, there you go.
No, that's really, really useful, really useful. And you mentioned a couple of bits that I'd like to just pick up on, unless anyone's got any more questions in the chat. But you mentioned in your presentation about meetings, and you wrote meetings, and I also found that key. Why was that particularly? I found that very useful in the starting point of my career. It still remains the case, but why was that so useful for you as a bit of a turning point?
I think it's useful. I actually think, to flip that question around, it's useful for them. It's useful for the people you're meeting, because you're getting in front of them. And people, you're more likely to remember someone's face than you are someone's voice on a phone, or someone's message on an email. And it just keeps you in people's minds. And that's something that I learned back in recruitment, that if you can get in front of a client, you're probably going to get the business. If you send an email, you're not going to be in the first place of the queue to someone who actually took the time to go and meet them in their offices and, you know, chuck a coffee in the face or whatever. Not in the face, but actually get them, you know what I mean. But yeah, I think it's important for them because they need to remember you, and that's how you're going to do it, meetings.
Great. And any tips then for getting a meeting with someone that you would that you've highlighted that would be a useful collaborator, or someone that you want to be known by?
Yes, I think do some research and see who you want to meet. If there's people that you're interested in meeting, and write a list down. Then work backwards. I'm a big fan of working backwards. See what buildings have worked for, what companies have worked for other artists, and you'll always naturally find some kind of link. For example, if it's an artist who's worked at the Unity, you know, drop Gordon an email or someone at the Unity an email and see if there's a link or a way that they can introduce you. I think making the intro warm is really important. So finding someone who knows that person who can intro you is good. I've done a lot of cold ones as well, and that's just been about patience and to keep going. There's a really fine line between pestering and also being persistent. And I think, I don't know, it depends on whoever it is you need to get hold of and how quickly you need to get hold of them. But there was one particular artist I wanted to speak to who I had no connection with whatsoever, and I used to send them emails every couple of months with updates, with something new to tell them, and almost like attaching it to the last email that I sent, saying, oh, you know, I hope you're well, I'm sure you're really busy, just to let you know I've done this and this since I last emailed you, and I really wanted to let you know about it. Also sending people solid things that they want to meet you, sending people solid events or things that they can come to is a good intro. Like if you've got a piece of work coming on, send them an invitation. That's a really strong way of doing an intro. But yeah, I think if you can get a warm intro, find some people who know some people that can intro you.
Fantastic advice, thank you. Another thing that came up in when you were talking earlier was around when you have an opportunity to be in a building, or in my experience previously, it was in my first job, it was working for a touring theatre company. There's a sense of that also expanding your mind coming out of, certainly for me, coming out of university, there was a sense of, I didn't know that there were various jobs that were required in a theatre or a touring theatre. So again, to echo, or maybe just to recap, would you just talk about why there are benefits then of working in a building or an organisation, or being in contact with one in order to understand the various jobs that people do?
Yeah, I mean, I think just following on from what you've said, it's really important to know on different scales of making work how many people actually have to be involved. I mean, working at Leeds Playhouse, there was like 100 people that was working there. Didn't even realise you needed that many people to make a theatre happen, but you do on that scale. But then also working for a company where there was 4 people, including me, so I was a quarter of the company, and how actually your job role changes completely, because in those bigger organisations, there's lots to do, but there's almost departments in a way, isn't there, Gordon, where each person, there's teams of people who are responsible for certain things. Whereas, depending on scale of the organisation, whereas in a company, if you're working as part of 4, you really have to have that get up and go attitude of, if I don't have the idea, get the funding, put the marketing out, it's not going to happen. And I think working for both, it's been really good for me. It's really been really invaluable experience, because now I know how to pitch myself depending on what scale of work that I'm doing. Very vague answer there, but yeah.
I think that really helps. One thing I noticed is that there are some people who feel, when you mentioned the get up and go approach, and there are some people on this call that I know really have that get up and go, and are able to do that by themselves, really self-motivated, able to achieve what they want. And others find that they're better off in an organisation, because the organisation helps cradle them and offer the opportunities and the platform for their artistic voice. So although you can't be as independent as you might be if you're working independently, it's still giving platform to your artistic voice. So I think there is a sense of trying both out to see where you sort of most naturally.
Yeah.
And indeed, much like you were saying around work, where you flip in and out of waitressing and then directing, it can be the same with this. At one moment you can be working in an organisation, next you can be working independently. I'm just going to ask, has anyone else got any further questions? Because we're drawing to a close here. So just have a quick look at the chat. Wait for anything to come through. Otherwise, in the meantime, Gitika, have you got anything else that's really come up from today that you'd like to just touch upon?
I don't think so, other than I'm always here if you need a chat. I'm very open to, if you fancy one of those creative calls, if you need someone to vibe off of with the 100k question, I'm very happy to have that phone call with you. Also, if you need intros, if you happen to see that I'm a link, please do get in touch with me. I'll put my email and number out to Gordon and the team, so I'm happy to do intros for you as well. And yeah, if there's anything else, do just let me know.
Brilliant. That's great. I think it's that creative, collaborative approach rather than competitive, which really helps people get forward. So that's really kind of you to offer that. So I'm going to then hand over to Rach, who's just going to wrap things up. But can I just say an enormous thanks, Gitika, to you for today, and all the preparation that you put in there as well. That's a lot. And a lot for other people to live up to as well. So very good. So thanks so much. And I'll now hand over to Rach.
Yeah, just a very quick sign off, really. So just to echo what Gordon said there, thank you so much, Gitika. That was incredibly inspiring. Really, really appreciate your time. It's really motivated me, definitely. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who's joined us on the call this morning, Monday at 11:30. Very impressive. So thank you so much. We really hope that you've got something out of this. What we'll do following this is we'll send some notes around. We'll send some links to some of those resources and some of those opportunities. And we'll also send how you can access the recording and how you can share it with other people you think may find it of interest. In general, we're running quite a few different opportunities like this for you to get involved with us. You might have noticed last week or the week before now, we announced our Building a Future programme that was basically designed with Liverpool artists to create a programme of work throughout lockdown to give you opportunities and the chance to connect with each other. This No One Way With series is a small part of that. So this coming Thursday, we've got Luke Barnes, a playwright, and he's going to be talking a lot about confidence as an artist and how you can instill confidence in those that you're speaking to as a playwright trying to commission a director, or a playwright pitch into a building, for example. So that's what Luke's going to cover. We then have our very own Gordon, who'll be chatting with Kevin Jameson from Home next week about programming and producing in venues and spaces of varying sizes and scales. And then we have director Matthew Zia, who'll be joining us at the end of next week to go through the different ways you can be a director, whether it's an artistic director, directing a play, or whether it's running community art. So they're the upcoming projects that we've got. I'm going to drop into the chat now a how we can help page. Basically, we know that our learning is never done with all of you. We've never wanted to assume at any point of this lockdown that we know best and that we know what you want, and we want to keep hearing what we can do to help you throughout all of this, because we can put these schemes in place, but if they're not of use to you, we want to make sure they are. So please do use this page to let us know how we can help throughout all of this. We know it's incredibly difficult and just not the easiest of times, so please use us. We're here and we really want to get to know all of you a lot better. So I think that's gone in the chat now. So yeah, that's everything. Thank you again, Gitika. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you everybody who joined us on the call.
Thanks everyone. Have lovely days and weeks. Speak to you soon.
Likewise. Thanks all. Thank you.
Zoom wave.
Thank you.
Bye.